Good morning. I'm really excited to be here. I was really intimidated when the German came up, so I'm glad I wasn't the only one. I saw some other folks who weren't quite singing quite as loud. I am in a very interesting position. It seems as though almost everybody is listening to me. Right? So I know some of you are saying, well, I'm not listening. I don't know who you are. Almost everybody is listening to me, but I don't think anybody is really hearing what I'm saying. And this is very fascinating to me because there was a long time when I felt no one was listening to me, right? That I was yelling about stuff and screaming and no one. Then suddenly it looked like everybody was paying attention to me. But yet, I really don't think anyone is hearing what I'm saying. So let me just start off by showing you why I think everybody is listening to me. But hold this in mind. Everybody is listening. I don't think anybody's paying attention to what I'm saying. So let me just ask folks if they could just roll some clips of, I think, folks listening and understanding what we're trying to do.
Ed Bradley first reported on Geoffrey Canada 3.5 years ago. But back then, there was no way to tell if his children's zone was working. Today, however, results are in, and they're nothing short of stunning.
Dr. Roland Fryer is a professor in the economics department at Harvard. He's conducted the first independent statistical study of Geoffrey Canada's efforts to close the racial achievement gap in his school.
The elementary school level, he closed the achievement gap in both subjects, math and reading.
Actually eliminating the gap in elementary schools.
We never say anything like that. Absolutely eliminating the gap.
Exhibit A, the zone's Promise Academy Charter School.
So these are our fourth graders.
This year's fourth grade class is special. It's the first class where all the kids have been in the zone's pipeline since birth.
The Harlem Children's Zone, which is a great example of Geoffrey Canada organizing a comprehensive way to give those poor kids in Harlem a chance to wind up and be David Letterman or Bill Clinton someday, or be great doctors or scientists, by dealing with all the various challenges they have. So if somebody gives money or time to the Harlem Children's Zone, they know that they're going to get a high rate of return.
All I have to do is push the send button. I have just tweeted my first tweet ever right here on the show. One of the saddest days of my life was when my mother told me Superman did not exist. I was a comic book reader, and I read comic books, and I just loved them, because even in the depths of the ghetto, you just thought, he's coming, I just don't know when, because he always shows up and he saves all the good people and they never end up. I was reading, I don't know, maybe I was in the 4th grade. My mother, I was like, Mom, you think Superman is not real? I was like, he's not. What do you mean he's, no, he's not real. And she thought I was crying because it's like Santa Claus is not real. And I was crying because there was no one coming with enough power to save us. I'm less concerned about the sort of culture wars around, is this conservative or liberal? I want the kids to be able to read. The kids can't read. It doesn't matter what's in the textbooks. If kids can't read, who really cares? My theory is, let's give kids a great education. Let's get them to college.
Okay, so I'll bite. Why is it important for underprivileged children to succeed? Spin your scenario.
It is absolutely critical if our country is going to remain number one. America is not number one or number two or even in the top 10 or even in the top 15 when it comes to reading and math and English.
And how do you measure success?
It is measured for us in a very straightforward way. How many of our children come back with college degrees?
You ever hear those people who say, this is crazy, you can't do it, and think that maybe you bit off too much?
As long as I am here, we're going to push this envelope as hard and as far as possible. And I think that in the end, it's going to be important that we demonstrate that we can get even the toughest kids to make it in America.
Please welcome Geoffrey Canada. Really, I just want to kiss you. Just want to kiss you.
No, but remember what I said now. So you do Oprah, you do 60 Minutes twice, you know, every news, Time magazine said one of the top 100 most influential people in the world. I put it up for my wife, right? She still doesn't believe it. It doesn't move her at all. I thought that with all of this attention, that people would really get what I was talking about, but people really have not gotten that. And before I explain, I have to tell you one short story about 60 Minutes, right? So the second time I did 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper, and I was talking about the challenges. The area I work in New York City is called Harlem. It's 100% essentially minority, poor kids who live in that area. And if you look at how kids perform in New York State, Harlem is always at the bottom of the list. And so I was talking to some of my team about the fact that two groups of kids were shooting handguns at one another who lived in a housing project. So this is these tall housing projects, concentrated poverty, and kids were shooting from one roof to the next roof. And we had a playground right between the two buildings where our kids were playing at. And my staff was really demoralized because folks were shooting. And I was saying to Anderson Cooper, look, when things really get tough, leaders have to show up, right? That's when you have to go right to where the heart of the problem is. And so I said to Anderson that I was going to go. George Caldoun, who's from my team, he's with me. We were both going to go right into the projects and tell our staff we're not giving up this territory, right? These are our kids. No one's going to drive us out from there. And Anderson says, that's great. Let's film it. Now, I have to raise a lot of money, right? And all I could think about when Anderson said, let's film it was, please, God, don't let them kill Anderson Cooper in Harlem, right? Because I'm thinking if they kill Anderson Cooper, America's going to hate me, right? They love Anderson Cooper. And this guy has been to every battle zone in the world and come back safely. So we got there, we filmed it, it was fine. If you want to know why, I don't think anyone's listening. People keep thinking that I'm trying to save some poor kids in Harlem. I'm actually trying to save our country. If you begin to see what's happening in the United States, people keep thinking this is a small, isolated problem. It is not small, and the problem is not isolated. Indeed, we have this huge problem in our country that there are huge numbers of kids who are not being prepared for the labor market. And it's happening all over the country. You can see it the clearest when you look at poor kids who happen to be of color, African American, Latino kids. But this is going on across our country, and I don't think anyone is really paying attention to this. You know, the reason I'm so concerned about this is that I have watched our country have another crisis that people knew about and did absolutely nothing about it. The chair of my board of trustees is a person named Stan Druckenmiller, who actually just had a full-page feature in the Wall Street Journal talking about the whole issue of how we're dealing with the deficit and whether or not we should allow the United States to default in order to get some real reforms in this country. But Stan showed me in 2006, this is before the financial collapse, he showed me what was happening in our country in relationship to housing. The data was clear and it was unambiguous. People were borrowing huge amounts of money. There was no way they were going to pay that money back. Everybody was refinancing. The housing market was this huge speculative bubble, and it was going to burst. And the data was clear exactly when that was going to happen because everybody had taken out these loans. They were interest-only loans. You could see it across the country, by city, by state, how many loans were taken out and when these loans were going to become due. And he just showed me this disaster about to happen. So I'm looking at this data. I'm not an economist. I'm not in business. And it is clear and unambiguous to me. And I say to him, so if you notice, why isn't anybody doing anything? And he said, look, I'm going to talk to the Fed. So he goes, he talks to the folks in the Fed. Then he said, so nothing happened. So he said, look, we got to go to the Congress. So he actually asked me to set up a meeting with a senator, which I did. And we went in and we laid out the data. It was clear what was going to happen to our country. No one did a thing. So this concept that people talk about, that, oh, this happened, people didn't know, it's not true. People knew, they did nothing. So I'm looking at another crisis for our country. Huge numbers of kids not getting an education. Huge. It's going to overwhelm our system. And again, I have this feeling that while you're talking to people, no one is paying any attention to this, and no one is taking this thing seriously. So you say, well, how bad is this? Well, we've had a very short-sighted investment policy in the United States. We know exactly where kids are failing. We have decided we're not going to necessarily educate those kids. And when the guys can't get jobs, we're simply going to make sure that there's enough jails to lock these folk up. It's pretty unambiguous. And it is amazing to me, the United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world. So, bar none. And if you think about, so let's see, where is the UK? The UK is number 92, right? So it's 92. Essentially, you're locking up in the UK about 150 people per 100,000 folk. You know what the United States is? 743 people per 100,000. The closest one next to us, that's off by over 200 people per 100,000, is Russia. No one, you think of the worst place in the world. What is the most repressive, backwards place? They're not even close to locking up folk the way we are. It is costing our country a fortune. And then you mentioned Rikers Island. It's the largest penal colony in the world, right? In the world. 14,000 people in Rikers Island. 14,000, right in New York City. Out of that 14,000, you're going to probably get 13,000 are going to be African American and Latino, right? You're going to get probably 999 white Americans and one French guy, right? I will tell you, I'm sure someone's thinking, I bet he didn't know he was going to end up here. It is a strategy that's going to essentially take our country, stop our growth, and essentially have us go backwards. Now, I know some folks are thinking, yeah, Jeff, that sounds pretty rough. The minority population is not getting an education. Closing this achievement gap is really a crisis, but it can't be that bad. You're talking about the whole nation not being able, oh, you know what people aren't dealing with? They're not dealing with the new census numbers. People haven't looked at the census numbers and what's happening here in the United States, all right? So a number of us thought, because people have been talking about the United States was mostly a white country, is now becoming increasingly a more diverse country. It's happening at a rate that most people simply don't understand, and the latest census data has made that somewhat clearer. In 1970, the United States was 83% white. If you look today, that number is 64%. And by 2040, the United States, just around the corner, the United States is going to have a majority minority population. And if you want to see what this looks like, and why I say that we are not preparing our nation to be successful. You just have to track what's happening in terms of this issue of diversity in our country. Now, if you look in 1990, there essentially were only about 7% of the counties, these are counties in America who are minority. So it's about 7%. So the red means it's a majority minority, and the orange means it's at a tipping point, that it's getting close to changing over. So then if you look at 2000, you begin to see what happens. You go to 2010, you go to 2020, you go to 2030, and just look at what's going on in this country. Now, if you know anything about the United States, you know where the density of our population is. And by the time you get to 2040, that's America. That's America. That's who's going to be our doctors, our engineers, our lawyers, our business folk. That's who it is. And if we aren't preparing this group for leadership, then I don't know how we expect our country to remain a great country. And by the way, these same trends are happening in most places in the world. And the challenge is that people keep thinking when they're hearing me and I'm on TV, they keep thinking I'm talking about these poor, those poor black folks, this small part. This is what's happening to our country. And we've got to do something about this. So we decided that we were going to have to figure out a strategy that was going to close the achievement gap between black and white students. And it was pretty straightforward. There are essentially 5 main components to what we were trying to do. The first is we decided we had to rebuild a sense of community, that we had to go into places that were literally falling apart. The urban centers that were filled with graffiti and trash and abandoned buildings, we had to clean that stuff up, and we had to get the adults to say, hey, look, we're going to take control of our communities and make them into better communities. Now, a lot of people don't get this strategy. They say, well, why do you have to fix up the neighborhoods and communities? Because if you're trying to end generational poverty, you've got to have the young people believing that their community is someplace that has value. Otherwise, when you get those young people through college, then they're going to go to somebody else's community because no one wants to raise a family in a community that's falling apart. So this idea of how do you rebuild community is something that we think is absolutely critical. The second thing we're doing is we start with kids from birth because the data is clear and unambiguous. Our kids start off behind, and it increasingly gets worse as the kids get older. The latest study by a group called Hart and Risley, they actually sent people into the homes of poor families on welfare to count the words that families spoke to kids, because we begin to learn this whole language and verbal sort of relationship is important in how the sort of neuronal structures get set very early on in a child's brain. So they're in there and they're counting every time a parent speaks, and then they do the same thing for professional families, families who have gone to college. For poor families on welfare, they found out that children had heard about 13 million words by the time they entered into school. In professional families, 48 million words. 13 million, 48 million. 35 million word difference. You can't say we're going to have equity and fairness and one group of kids get a 35 million word head start and expect the other group to be able to compete. Just not going to happen. So we know this early involvement is important, and we believe you get those kids and you begin with those kids early. But here is one of the mistakes we've made in our business. We've tried to figure out how little you can do for a child for the shortest period of time to make a difference. So everybody's thinking, well, can you work with kids early and then they'll be fine? Or I'll do middle school and then kids will be fine. You know what we found out? The moment those young people don't have high quality supports, they end up not doing well. And if you really follow the data, you will find that if the goal is to get all kids to graduate from college, that most of our kids, no matter what the intervention, they end up dropping out of college in just extraordinarily high numbers. So we thought, you've got to stay with kids through elementary school, through middle school, through high school. You've got to get those kids into college, and then you've got to help them get through college. And so the only thing we count as success is how many of our kids graduate from college. Nothing else. Now that has proven to be somewhat controversial. Because people are saying, Jeff, you're focused on college. All kids aren't going to college. Some kids, you need vocational training for these kids. And I say, if you get paid to work with other people's kids, then you should have the same expectation for those kids you're paid to work with as for your own kids. Now, the other thing, now this is also controversial, I tell folk, when in doubt, when you're not sure about the science because it's not clear, do what rich people do, right? So there's a theory for you. Just hang on to that. So, and this is what I mean. I told you I have to raise a lot of money, right? So that means I have to know a lot of wealthy people. It's hard to raise money if all you know is poor people. I found that out the hard way. You could try it, but you're not going to be very effective. So, and I've yet to meet someone who has wealth and have 3 kids, and they say, oh, so this boy, I'm thinking I'm going to send my son to Yale, and this one's going to Oxford, but this one here, I think I'm sending her to hairdresser school. I don't know what to do. Never heard that, right? One expectation, all of their kids go to college, and I think that for our kids, you have to have the same expectation. By the way, my wife and I, we have 3 grown kids. We had the same expectations for all of our kids. Right? 2 of them went to college, 1 didn't. Same expectations. 2 went, 1 didn't. By the way, I think that's one of those universal laws. If you've got 3 kids, one of them's going to give you a run for the money. Don't worry about it. Don't pull your hair. Oh, what did we do wrong? No, that's just the way it is. But we believe that the only way you're going to compete for jobs is if you have a college education. I don't think there's any other way you're going to do this. Now, here's the next thing that we fundamentally believe. You've got to deal with scale. In our area, we're working in 97 blocks in central Harlem, essentially 11,000 kids in that area. We're working with about 8,000 of those kids. You've got to work with so many kids that you actually change what the culture is in that community. If kids grow up in a community where they believe that it is expected of them to go out and hustle, that they're going to go sell drugs, they're going to go and be involved in crime, if that's what they see all around them, then most kids end up being like the culture that they grow up in. We believe you got to change that culture. So when my kids are growing up in the zone, I've got about 600 of my kids who are currently in college. And so my kids are surrounded by lots of kids who are going to college. And we're trying to make sure these kids understand that that's the culture, that's what it means to grow up in our community. In the United States, we lose our kids by the tens of thousands, and we tend to save them by the 20s and maybe by the 100. We've got to ramp this thing up and save kids by the thousands, which is what we're doing in Harlem. Now, the 4th part of our mission really has to deal with the use of data. And this is really incredible. We have divorced results from practice in our business. And it's just no other business I know of that you can simply keep doing something that's not working for decades. And here's the challenge we have in our country. I grew up in an area of New York City called the South Bronx. It was one of the most disadvantaged areas in New York City. So I'm 59. So the schools I went to in the South Bronx 53 years ago, they were lousy schools then. They're lousy schools today. So for 53 years, those schools have been lousy. Lousy in the 60s, they were lousy in the 70s, lousy in the 80s, lousy in the 90s, lousy in 2000. If you were to say, okay, what's different, right? So you've had all of these decades of failure. What's different in those schools today than when I went to school? Nothing. They start at the same time. They end at the same time. Nothing. There is no sense of crisis around this issue of education. We are totally comfortable with certain folks failing for decades and thinking we don't have anything to do. So I make these really radical statements that people are upset with me all over the country. Actually, I have some people upset with me around the world because I believe, I know this is going to sound really radical, that if someone cannot teach and you can prove they can't teach, then maybe they should get another job. I know that's radical. People are upset. They say, did he just say you should fire somebody who can't? Yeah, I think you should fire them. And all around the country, people are yelling, there's Jeff, he's talking about firing folks. No, wait, I didn't say fire mediocre people, right? I'm saying if you're really terrible and you cannot teach, we cannot fire you in New York City. You can't lose your job. Now, who thought of that brilliant plan, right? Could you imagine? And it's worse. It's worse. You can't do anything different no matter what's going on inside your classroom. They all have to start at the same time. They have to end at the same time. They have to work the same number of days. When I went to the Harvard Graduate School of Education and graduated with my master's degree in 1975. So this is ancient history. We knew then in the summertime, poor kids, right, actually lost ground with their peers. So if you looked at where they were in June, and then you look where they were in September, they actually went down. So they had this loss over the summer. The evidence was clear and it was scientific. This was not anybody's opinion. Based on that evidence, there is not one school system I know in the United States that decided, well, since our kids lose ground in the summer, why don't we keep our schools open in the summer? Not one. How could you have clear science, huge numbers of kids failing, and nobody do anything about it? It is just unbelievable to me. It's simply because we have not cared about these young people. And people have felt like we can sacrifice these kids and it's really not going to have an impact on our country. Those days are over. I tell folks, this is the equivalent, the way we run schools. So the same number of days, 3 o'clock, all teaching stops no matter what. We don't care whether that kid has learned or not. The whistle blows and that's it. It is a crazy system that totally is divorced from results. It's like if you're a firefighter and you come to a town, the whole town is burning, right? And so you get all the firefighters and they get their hoses out and they start putting on the hose and you get the fire half put out and they say, oh goodness, it's 3 o'clock, let's come back tomorrow, right? And then you come back tomorrow, so the thing, of course, it's still burning, it's worse. And you fight the fire for a while, and you say, geez, it's June, we'll come back in September. And so what if the town is burned down? See, everybody would think that was crazy. They said, what, those people left? They just left in the middle of the job? They just left all? So that's what we're doing to our kids. We just leave them. So what if they're all failing? No big deal. It's a multi-billion-dollar business where we've separated the accountability. So when we started our school, now I told you these schools have been failing for 50 plus years. When we started our schools, we decided we were going to have a different accountability system. Okay, I went to our mayor, Mayor Bloomberg. I went to the chancellor, who was in a guy named Joel Klein, and I went to my board of trustees. And I said, if I don't have a better school than these other public schools in Harlem, in 5 years, I'm going to fire myself, right? When I said that, people wrote it down. They said, Jeff said 5 years, he's not have a better school. When they left, I got my whole staff together. I said, but you all know I'm the last one leaving, all right? So just so we're clear about this, right? So you know, but you know I'm not kidding. You know I'm not kidding. If there's nothing to lose in failure. Can you imagine if you could run your business and it didn't matter whether or not it was successful at all? Not at all. It just made no difference. You know, there would be some people, I know, there's some people that are so committed, they would work hard and they would do everything, but you can't run a business with the thought that people are simply going to do the right thing regardless of results. We have certainly run education that way for poor kids in our country, and it is no longer, in my opinion, a minor thing. So this issue of accountability to me is absolutely critical. We have, I think, just begun to come to grips with the fact that there are real strategies out there that work. But the problem is there's so much resistance. There's so much resistance to change in my business that you know, if you look at education, I've been lucky enough that at my age, I remember the first computers that came into public schools. In 1968, they brought the first computer to my school. You had to bring the thing in a Mack truck, right? I mean, you remember what these computers looked like? They were like huge things, right? And then you had to punch holes in all of these cards, right? I know, see, some of y'all don't know what I'm talking about because y'all are young. You had to punch hole. We used a language called Fortran back then. That's like ancient history. You had to punch hole. If you made one mistake, you punch 200 cards, you make one mistake, it wouldn't work. And you sit there and you punch all of this stuff and you take all those cards and you put them in a hopper and read through. After that 30 minutes, it could tell you 8 times 8, right? It could give you 64. And I, you know, being a very smart person, I really was I'm pretty much in the genius category. After doing all that work and punching and putting all that in, I just thought, there's no future in this whole computer thing, right? So it didn't seem to make a lot of sense to me, right? But you can imagine what would have happened if there had been no competition, if there had been no pressure to improve. If everybody wanted that, and they were happy to pay whatever you charged, and there was no pressure to improve anything, where would we be? Education right now, the way we teach kids, is exactly where it was in 1968. There has not been an innovation, there's been no change, there's been no pressure to change, and because it's devoid of results, who cares? I don't think that makes any sense anymore. I don't think our country can afford it. And I think we've got to do something different. And that's what I've been yelling about. But people keep thinking that I'm yelling about a small group of kids that I'm pretty much incidental in terms of the outcomes for this country. And that's because they haven't focused on what's really going on in America. That our country is changing, and it's changing rapidly and dramatically. So I'd like to leave you with one challenge that I think we're facing, which is how come we have to think outside the box in education? I was taught to think outside the box by one professor who, when I was an undergraduate, I went to a small liberal arts college called Bowdoin College up in Maine, and I was a psych major. And so when as a freshman, I went to psychology class, and a bunch of the upper class folks asked me, they said, "Jeff, what's your major?" I said, "Psychology." They said, "How's your math?" I said, "I'm not really into math, right? I'm into the social sciences." They said, "Well, you have to pass statistics." And there are a bunch of people in a different major because of statistics, all right? So we had our first exam coming up, and I studied all week, and I was up all night, and I took the exam. A week later, I got the exam back. I got a 37. I was devastated. I hadn't failed anything since the 2nd grade. And I was going to quit. I was just humiliated. I was embarrassed. And then something said, "Go talk to the professor." So I went in there to see the professor. I was literally in tears, and I just said, "Look, I want to help people. I want to be a psych major. I worked so hard on this. I was up all night. I don't know what happened." He said, "Jeff, calm down." He said, "Calm down." He says, "I know what happened." I said, "You do? What happened?" He said, "It was the slant." I said, "What do you mean it was the slant?" He said, "You'll get this because you're a psych major. All of our textbooks, they have real authors, and the authors have real biases, and the biases come up in their writing. This textbook has an author with a particularly strong bias. It's working for all the other kids. It's not working for you." He says, "I want you to try a textbook written by an author with the opposite bias." So I said, he said, "We'll try a little experiment." He said, "Read tonight's chapter, answer the questions, see what happens." I read the chapter, I answered the questions, I didn't get it. He said, "I want you to read that same chapter in the new book. Answer the question, see what happens." I read the chapter, answered the questions, I got it. I said, "Look, I understood it." He said, "Well, look, we have finals coming up. You have 3 chapters left. I want you to read the 3 chapters in the old book, answer the questions, see what happens." I read the chapters, answered the questions, I didn't get it. He said, "I want you to read those same 3 chapters in the new book, answer the questions, see if you get it." I read the chapters, answered the question, I got it. Took the exam, I got an A on the exam. Well, the next semester, I was sitting in a perception class when it suddenly hit me. I said, you know what? That didn't have anything to do with a slant. This guy got me to read 2 books, right? And I was absolutely furious with him, right? He took advantage of my sophomoric mind with that whole slant thing. But it reminds me that we constantly have to push innovation. I mean, we just have to push it. We can no longer allow the status quo to continue. And that has been the mission that I've been on at the Harlem Children's Zone. That's what I'm going to continue to yell about. I think this is important for our country. If we're going to have a great country 30 years from now, we have to solve this right now. So thank you all very much.